I have this deep passion to see other people released, taught, developed, encouraged, comforted, whatever, so that they are becoming what they were meant to be. And I think if you ask me what makes me tick on my good days, that's it.
It is awesome to welcome Mike Baer back to the Seek, Go, Create podcast. Mike was our guest in February 2020, and now he's joining us again as we celebrate our 302nd episode. Mike is a veteran of the modern business as mission, we're going to call it BAM throughout this conversation, movement. He's an experienced pastor, entrepreneur, theologian is actually attached to his name, and executive. He's led and taught BAM on nearly every continent, well-traveled. He's also a prolific author, speaker, and the founder of Third Path Initiative. Mike, welcome back to Seek, Go, Create.
Hey, Tim, it's good to be back. I can't believe it was February of 2020. We had our first interview. That's staggering to me. So it's great to see you.
So we're releasing this. It'll probably be released in March of 2025. We're recording it towards the tail end or middle of February to put a timestamp on it. So it has been right at 5 years.
It's amazing. And we just keep getting better looking, brother.
I tell you what, for those that are listening to the audio, you have got to go over to YouTube and for, 30, 45, 60 minutes, just check out. What's amazing is that we gave up all that money doing all the modeling and acting and things we could have done to serve the kingdom, right? We sacrificed.
We paid a big price, man. And the world is better for it.
Absolutely. Well, I shared with you, Mike, this is kind of fun. Our episode 300, we interviewed AI and had a long conversation with that. Last episode was 301. We had Jim Cook, who was originally in January of 2020, a Silicon Valley veteran, and, great conversation with him. And now you're coming back, and I love the conversations we have. The biggest challenge we have is that we can't do the 3.5 hour, Joe Rogan style. We've got to keep it to,
we should, but no one would listen.
I mean, if anybody's listening in and they're like going, you know what? I'd love to hear these guys talk for 2 or 3 hours. Let me know. I could arrange it. I could do it. I'd love to do it.
We'll do it live. How about that? We'll do it live. I bet your guests don't remember that we actually worked together almost 30 years ago, and we got really close, and we had incredibly fun conversations about business, about God, about the kingdom. And yes, we can do it. We can go for 3 hours without a problem.
Yeah. One thing we'll do, we probably won't circle back to some of those topics from February of 2020, but we're going to include a link back to that episode down in the notes on YouTube. And so one of the things we want to do here, this is what I was excited about when I looked back and said, what do we want to do to celebrate 300? I said, you know what? I'm going to go back to some of my favorite conversations. They did well, downloads, all that kind of stuff, but I want to just kind of catch up and let people listen in. So let's put a mark on what was going on in February of 2020. Do you recall what was happening with you?
Yeah.
And then of course, what was leading into.
Yeah, that, of course, we all know that February, March 2020 was when the world came to a standstill over COVID. And just probably 2 weeks after we had our podcast interview, I was on my way to Jamaica to host a company celebration trip and got turned back mid-trip because of the pandemic. We didn't even know what we were dealing with. But I'll tell you one quick memory from that day. I know we don't want to go back there, but I can remember in the early days, none of us knew what was going on. I was on my trip home, and I was in a Delta Sky Club. We used to call them Crown Room back in the day, but a Sky Club, and I sneezed. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, everybody had these spray bottles of stuff. And it was like an old Western movie where everybody pulls out their 6-shooter. It was like, what in the world's going on? And we didn't know at the time the fear and the anxiety and the lack of knowledge that would drive our world for 2 or 3 years. So yeah, that's what this was.
Yeah, we were in Colorado. Our first granddaughter was born early February. Glory had come back from a trip to Berlin that she just sort of collapsed in my arms with some sickness
Oh.
that we weren't quite sure what it was. Probably she had her company and had an all hands from people all over the world, Asia and everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd gone to a Podfest conference that weekend of March, like 7th, 8th. And then a bunch of us, me and my son and my son-in-law, they were with me. We went to Disney World on March 9th. We went to the Star Wars experience it's not MGM anymore. It's whatever the studios is down there. And we were there packed in, grabbing the rails with just massive numbers of people. No one had a clue. And then March 13th, that Friday the 13th, of course, is when the country shut down.
Yeah.
And I think we're clear of all of that situation now. But when you look back on it, two learning points. What did you learn about yourself, about Mike as a leader, business person, man of God, whatever? And then second, what did you learn about the world and organizations, leadership, whatever? Just so micro learns and then macro learns.
No, that's a great question. What I learned, it was a very sort of simplistic answer for me, but it stuck. It was powerful and it was life changing. I can remember when this first hit, and everybody was, people were starting to get sick, and we were beginning to see hospitals fill up. And I can remember saying, in a very childlike sort of prayer, like, Lord, I don't know how to deal with this, so here's what I'm going to do. If you want me to get it, I'm going to get it. If you don't want me to get it, I'm not going to get it. If you want me to get it and die, I'm going to get it and die. If you want me to get it and survive, I'm going to get it and survive. Point being, there's nothing really I can do. Not that you shouldn't make choices. I'm not, not being a magical thinker here, but that was what took me very quickly from the potential panic to peace. That I'm going to walk, I'm going to make wise choices, I'm going to do what I need to do, but I'm going to do it in the context that my Father in heaven is all powerful, loves me, and I can rest in that. That was my personal learning. And I will tell you, Tim, that truth guided me for the next 2 or 3 years, not just in the pandemic world, but it became a North Star. That's why I said it's childlike, but I did kind of remember Jesus saying, you become like a child, you're going to understand the kingdom a whole lot better. So that was a real personal revolution for me. On a more macro level, what I saw, and I think this holds true today, even, it's 2025, we're dealing with a new administration. We could get all political. We're not going to, but we're seeing the same tendency of the sheep to panic. And, the term that came out during the pandemic was the term sheeple, right? And I'm not slamming anybody. I'm not being critical or negative here. I just saw how easily frightened the general public, all of us at some days, right? On some days, all of us at one point or another are easily frightened. But I saw how quickly masses of people can fall victim to fear. And if you're a Dune fan like I am, Frank Herbert wrote in there, fear is the mind killer. And it is. It just freezes your brain. It freezes your ability to think and choose. John put it in 1 John, fear has torment, right? Fear is a terrible thing. And so I just came to grips with the tendency of human beings in bold relief to be fearful. Translate that into leadership. I saw that what people need is not dictatorial strongmen. They don't also need a bunch of fear mongerers, What they need is people that know who they are. They know their purpose. They can articulate that purpose in a way that other people can begin to find some stability. And when the normal human being begins to find stability, their fear starts to subside, and that stability becomes theirs and not mine any longer. Does that make sense? The
Yeah.
ability of a leader to share their confidence in a way that wasn't controlling, wasn't manipulating, but it was liberating and comforting.
So there's a word interesting. It came up last week when we were in episode 301 talking to Jim Cook, sort of in a different way when we were talking about the Silicon Valley culture. But the word that kept popping in my head was the word risk. And, you talked about it personally. You had some fear initially and you worked through it. And
Mhm.
I think that I did too. I have this weird personality that I maybe it's delusional that I wouldn't admit it, but I was probably facing it too because we had traveled and we were in an RV and it's like, man, a lot of weird stuff was going on. But I've often wondered if we have become an incredibly risk averse culture and how that feeds into us individually, personally, and then also into business and leadership and government. One of the things that came up last week, I think I recommend people go listen, is Jim was talking about when you bring in a Silicon Valley high risk culture into Washington, D.C., which is what we're seeing with Elon Musk. It's like, boy, there's going
Yes.
to be a clash. Again, we
Yeah.
don't have to get off on talking about that. Talk about the word risk in relation to what you just shared with all that we've been through over the last 5 years.
Yeah. And I think you just connected the past and the present beautifully because risk is life, life is risk. And if we cannot take a step, we cannot get in a car, we cannot go to a restaurant, we cannot marry somebody, we cannot have children, we cannot get a new job. I mean, show me a way to remove risk from any of those things. And it's not there, right? So the first thing you have to grasp, and this is what I dealt with the Lord, it's like, look, there's risk. I could die here. So I'm going to deal with risk the best way I know how, and that is take my hands off of it, go forward, trusting you. And I think that when I think about risk, um, I'm not a big risk taker. I'm not going to skydive. I'm not going to mountain climb. Maybe I'm a wimp, but for me, risk is not something you take. Risk is something that's simply there and you cannot avoid it. So how do you learn to deal with it? Quick comment on the political side scene. This is a nonpartisan critique of government. I am a libertarian at heart. My T-shirt says underneath it says, "I love Rand Paul. I love Ron Paul, his dad." Right? I mean, and I love Milei. I'm going to Argentina in a few weeks. I'm really hoping I get to meet the president down there, the uber libertarian. But these are people that recognize that you can't govern risk out of life. You can't legislate risk out of life. You can't executive order risk out of life. Quick analogy. When I used to work in France, I discovered that the word bureau, from which we get bureaucracy, means desk, right? And so a bureaucracy is government from people who sit at desks, a nice, safe desk. And so they're trying, and I think most of them are well-intentioned, deluded, but well-intentioned. They are trying to legislate and regulate risk out of life, at which point they take life and turn it into death. Remember C.S. Lewis in the Four Loves book he wrote? He said, there is a place where you can be free from the fear of losing through love. It's called a casket. Lewis classic, but what a point. So yeah, to me, I have to recognize if I'm going to live, and now I see my kids, you have kids, I have 7 grandchildren now. One of them's about to graduate high school and go off to college. And I'm wavering because I can't control the risk that these kids will face. But I'm having to go back to that. Okay, God, I've got to give it back to you. And call me simplistic. Many have. They would be probably right. But if it could, my response to risk is to want to control. And control is one of the ultimate illusions. What are you really in control of? What are you and I in control of? Nothing, pretty much. And so I learned to live, I deal with risk by keeping my hands open.
If we go back 5 years, I put some thought into this and kind of feeding off that control word you just brought up, which all this is kind of weaving together really beautifully. I like it. I know I have a high degree of desire to control. Maybe a lot of humans do. I think there's some people that just have a natural childlikeness, and in some ways, Mike, those could be people we call sheep. And so I don't criticize them. I actually have in the past, and I need to repent of that, because there is something to just saying whatever. Now, I think you need to, whatever Lord should be that instead of whatever government, whatever boss, whatever, you know what I mean? You need to align yourself with what you're going to follow as a sheep if you're doing that. And I think I need a little more sheepness in me than shepherd, because I'm trying to control and monitor and all that. If you look back 5 years ago and kind of where you were on the control scale, 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, whatever. And then 5 years now, look at where you are on the control scale. You mentioned grandkids, and, you probably used to be able to kind of keep, your arms around your family, and now they're spreading out. How has your control gauge changed over the last 5 years? Mine has.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think about it. I remember an exchange I had with my oldest daughter when she was a teenager, and she was mad at me about something which was pretty normal. She said, "You're such a control freak." I said, "I am not. Go to your room." And that was because I was, and I've discovered that by habit, that whatever the world, the system, my own frailty, control is what I want. And it's what that prayer with God was, giving up control. I had no control. It wasn't giving up something. It was really acknowledging the reality. So I would say the last 5 years for me, and I'm pushing 70. I turned 70 in 2 weeks. And so I think part of it comes with age, Tim. Honestly, there's the longer you live, the more you realize there's very little you can control. And then you start to realize you really have no control over even that. So part of that is that. But I think for me, the need to control, it's no less. I don't think that habit of wanting to be in control is gone away. I think what has changed is the speed with which, or maybe the comfort with which, I'm being able to bring it back to God and say, all right, Jesus, here's another thing that you're in control of and I'm not. So I think that, yes, it's been a journey, and I know you and I were both wired that way. We're both achievers. And one of the things that drives an achiever is control, because it's this belief that once I achieve ABC or XYZ, I will finally be in control. And of course, that's not true. So I'm looking and learning about achieving without being driven by the need to control, achieving for achievement's sake, for the sake of the person, that I'm serving, versus this unconscious, hey, I'm in control now. That, I learned that every time I get on an airplane, right? And you recognize the moment you walk through the TSA window, you are no longer in control. You are in the matrix, and you are no longer in control. But when you step on a plane, and for me, you look into the cockpit as you walk past, and you see these two children sitting in controls, you realize I'm not in control here. And I'm actually enjoying the journey of giving up control. It's not easy, but there's a certain healthy enjoyment to it.
And I think that's part of our journey. One of our subtitles here is the leadership journey. We're going to talk specifically leadership in a little while, but I think leadership starts with, us sitting in the seat and what we are able to learn. Have you ridden in one of these driverless cars yet? My son was taking me to the airport last week. We were in Phoenix, and I looked over, and one of these Waymo cars with all the, the little dome on top and all. And I looked up, took a picture of it in a video, and I couldn't see anybody in the back seat because the windows are kind of tinted. And I was just thinking to myself, wonder if I could do that. And then I thought, this is where I connected the dots. One of the things that happened for us, and I think I shared this with you, my father passed, had some cognitive decline, went down fairly quickly during COVID. We believe COVID sped it up because they were isolated, a lot of things going on. But my father grew up in a shop in middle of nowhere, North Hamilton, Mississippi, and cars were important to him. And one of the biggest challenges and struggles we had late in his life was wanting to get in the car. And my mom was saying he keeps wanting to drive and we're not sure if he can. He doesn't even know who any of us are. And so we had ordered some wings at a place that was 2 or 3 miles from the house. And he was kind of arguing about, I'll drive and all that. And I said, you know what? Hop in the driver's seat and drive. And I jumped in the passenger seat with him, and my wife and my mother were like going, what are you doing? What are you doing? I said, you know what? The only way we can know kind of what's going on is if someone rides along. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, so, hey, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
But you know what, though? He drove like a champ. Now, he didn't know where he was going or where to get back to or any of that kind of stuff, but the muscle memory was there.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I bring all that up is to kind of ask, have you ridden in one of these driverless cars? I mean, because those kind of things, we have a desire for control, but yet I am pretty confident that some of these driverless cars is better than the other person that's sitting beside you driving their car.
Yeah. So answering in reverse, number one, I agree with you totally. The chances of a human being next to me looking at his or her phone while they're driving and swerving into me are much higher than a glitch in the software or the sensors of a driverless car. I agree with you on that. I have not driven in one yet, but I have wanted to. I haven't been anywhere where it was an option. Would I get in one? Absolutely. And it would be an adventure. I could either live, like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Or this is kind of cool. I'm one of those weird guys that would go to the space station in a heartbeat. 70 years old, if they asked me, heck yeah, I'd go. If Elon Musk came and said, hey, you want to be the father figure on the flight to Mars? Yeah, let's go. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not some hero pioneer, but in those areas, things like that, yeah, I think I not only could do it, I think I would enjoy it. It's a discipline, because this is a theme, this control and letting go of control. It has a lot to do with leadership, by the way, but it's a theme of my own growth over the years and those around me is that I remember I used to do it, I still do, but I used to do a lot of international travel. And I would watch people just freaking out on a 9 or 10. I think the longest flight I ever took was 14 hours. And they were freaking out. They just couldn't handle it. And I learned, and of course they would drink and all the, and I'm not saying I didn't either, but for different reasons. But I learned people say, how do you handle it? I said, I go to my happy place. And it was a mental place for me to go to and say, there's nothing within the realm of possibility I can do to change anything at this moment. Nothing I do or say or drink or watch or anything is going to get me there faster. So where do I go? I go to my happy place, which is I'm not in control. It's amazing to me, Tim, how happy I can be when I'm not controlling.
And so what you're controlling is what you can control.
That's exactly right. There's one of my favorite T-shirts I saw one time. On the front, it said, there are 2 immutable truths in the universe. On the back, it said, number 1, there's a God. Number 2, you are not him. And whenever I can get to that place, I'm much happier. When I'm not happy, it's usually an indicator that I'm denying the 2 immutable truths.
Yeah. I'm curious, Mike, by the way, happy birthday. There's a good chance that I won't send you a text or anything and wish you happy birthday. I don't do that with anyone, but happy birthday now. My wife keeps up with everyone's birthdays and she goes, oh, it's so good. Good for him.
Good for them.
I hope they have a good day. Happy birthday. 70, that's sort of a milestone. I guess you're a little over halfway, I think, depending on how you measure it and all that.
Maybe, but we'll find out.
How are you measuring, gauging, thinking about success at this stage? Seeing what we all went through the last 5 years, what you're looking ahead to and all. Just talk about what success means to you now.
Yeah. So, and I've listened to a lot of your podcasts over the years, and I know you come back to this with almost everybody. And I would tell you my definition has changed. And I'll tell you, my definitions at the moment seemed pure and godly, but with the perspective of time, you realize they weren't. They were things like never make a lot of money. That was never a big motivator for me. It's always just, I want to have enough. Problem is, of course, there's enough is a moving target. But for me, it was typically around recognition or recognized impact. In the beginning, over time, it became more impact. Recognition still matters. Don't get me wrong. I still believe I should be on center stage, at the opera, but it's more just knowing I've made a difference. And recently, over the last 5 years, I've begun to start loosening my grip on that as well, because even that's vainglory. Even that comes back to, Mike's at the center, right? And so I've begun to think, and this is fairly recent, I've begun to think about what really matters to me. What is success is to fulfill that for which I was created. Right? Paul talks in Ephesians 2 about we are God's workmanship. The Greek can be translated into we are God's masterpiece, work of art. We are his magnum opus, and we are created in Christ Jesus to do good work. This is really important. And so does it matter that even I know that that's happening? And I think, and I'm not there yet. Hear me clearly. I am not there yet. But what I'm wrestling with now is, you know what, Lord, I don't even need to be aware. What matters is that the purpose for which you've made me is happening. And if you choose to let me in on a little glimpse of it, great. If you don't, great. And that goes back again, that childlike prayer, maybe childish too, but that childlike prayer during COVID is, it's his. The guy said something to me years ago. He said, look, we have a 20-second walk-on in God's cosmic drama, which means our part, which to us is all-consuming, in the big scheme of things, is not that much. Now, it doesn't mean we're not important, right? We are created in the image of God. We are incredibly loved by God. We are redeemed by the death of Jesus Christ. I mean, we are incredibly important, but to him. And so that's kind of, I guess that's kind of what I'm being exercised on right now.
So related to that, because, you and I would probably use similar words like, impact. And I do have a craving for recognition. It's not just that I want to quietly go about doing things. And I'm okay admitting this now. I like for people to acknowledge that I've done some things. So it kind of helps me keep it hopefully tempered at times. Do you have at this stage of your life an awareness of your superpower or, what he created you for? And are you do you have more clarity in that or less clarity at this stage? Know you. So I actually could recognize and probably spout some of your superpowers maybe as well as you can, but what do you believe are your superpowers or what he instilled in you at the beginning?
So let me roll back just to clarify something, because you said something that triggered for me. I don't want anybody listening to this to think somehow I've gone totally zen and I have none of these passions. All of that is still there, but it's moved out of the center. I still want to achieve and I still want to be recognized.
Or it's not the total drive. What I'm starting to recognize in me, it's like, and I don't like walk in a room or get on the phone with Mike and I'm thinking about what's in it. This sounds a little selfish, but it's, what's in it for me? How does this impact me? Get me on his podcast so I could I don't think about that anymore. And you knew me years ago. I did. I thought about that years ago and it wasn't good or bad. It was just where I was at that point.
Yeah. And that's why I don't want anybody to think somehow you outgrow these things. Whatever your particular habits are driven by needs that were imprinted on you probably when you were 2, 3, 4 years old. Those don't go away, but you learn to live with them. You learn to live beyond them. And I think that's the point. So my superpower, it's funny. I'm constantly coming back to the question, okay, Lord, what is the call of my life? I think there are many calls, but I think there's a core call, the way he made you, right? And for me, this is what I would land on. I think at the heart of Mike is I have this deep passion to see other people released, taught, developed, encouraged, comforted, whatever, so that they are becoming what they were meant to be. And I think if you ask me what makes me tick on my good days, that's it. I have some people say, well, you're a pastor. Yes, but I don't like that term because it's what it means in American, Christianity. It's a job with a pulpit. It's like, no, I mean, the pastor is a shepherd who equips, who helps others learn better how to do what they're gifted to do. That's what really cranks my tractor, as we like to say in the mountains of North Carolina.
I agree with that. And the word Sherpa came to mind, someone who's a
Mhm.
leader, or a guide. And, but kind of like the follow-up question, this is where I've been putting a lot of thought in myself, because I think self-awareness is probably a power that a lot of us need more of. I
Oh,
consider
it's
that.
huge.
And that's part of the journey. When we subtitle this, the leadership journey, part of the journey is to be aware. But with a superpower, to use the Superman analogy, it can often become kryptonite. What are some downsides that you see to that calling, gifting, superpower, whatever language you want to use, that you've sort of had to either come to terms with or adjust or whatever?
I think the kryptonite that's built into my desire to see others prosper is taking responsibility for the outcomes. I cannot, if I coach you and I love you and serve you and try to bring you the best insight I possibly can and you don't use it, that's on you. But the kryptonite is, no, wait, Tim, you didn't do what I said. So we're kind of back to control. I think that's part of it. Or the alternative to that would be taking the glory. Wow, look at Tim. I developed that boy. Well, you see, every superpower has a kryptonite. And I think, frankly, now for the job pastors of the world, I think that's their kryptonite very often is they're trying to live on the outcome of what their service creates, and then they can't do that.
One of the things you and I discussed this, I think, in depth 5 years ago was because you'd been a pastor, you left the pastoral role of church planner and running a church, and everybody thought you had backslid and all. I highly recommend people go listen to that. It was a great conversation about the state of
Yeah.
ministry and things like that. And it's interesting that you don't want to use the word pastor, but truthfully, maybe disciple, because I think as a coach in today's world, we might be the closest thing to truly, spending time discipling people. And some people might be upset about that, whatever. But you and I will often discuss issues with what we call the church in our current culture, etc. What have you seen, either positives or negatives, over the last 5 years with what in general we call the church? And sometimes I'm wondering if we call the church the wrong thing. I don't even know if what we see, these buildings dotted all across, first world 501c3s and all that, Shady Acres, whatever. I don't even know if that is technically the church now, but anyway, just
Uh,
a few thoughts on that before we
yeah.
move on and talk leadership.
Yeah. A couple of quick thoughts. Just a friend of mine here in North Carolina that we're very, very close. And we'll talk to each other. We'll text each other on a Sunday morning. He'll say, hey, are you going to the building today? Right. And we do that on purpose to make a point. Sometimes we say, no, let's meet for coffee. Sometimes my wife and I will stay home and watch some guy on TV because it's just she and I, but we need Cindy and Mike church. So let me go back to when we all closed up, or most churches closed up, and ours did for a while. We didn't panic, but everybody was trying to do what they thought was right and trying to save each other as best they could. So we closed up for a while. And I remember during that time, I was on the board of elders and I asked the rest of the elders, I said, guys, are you listening to what God may be saying to the church right now? And they said, what do you mean? Well, that's the problem right there. But I said, are you sensing that there's a message to the church right now that we need to hear? We've been given this beautiful pause, right? It's halftime. And we get a chance to really look at the game plan. They weren't, but I kept going around. This is what I did. I kept asking people when we weren't meeting, what do you miss? Invariably, 80% of the people would say, you know what? I just miss being with other believers. I said, well, what about the sermon? Yeah, I do. Really. How about the music? Yeah, kind of. I mean, you see the point? And so I heard over and over and over, what we miss is the being together, the interaction with other people. So what I've seen coming out of COVID is most churches just went on their merry way. They just reopened and did literally everything that they were doing before. They did not listen to whatever I think God was saying. What I've begun to see is not a drifting from the church, the organized building church, but a movement, a conscious movement away from the formalized and whatever. You can be in high church, low church, whatever, but the programmatic thing we do in the building when we're supposed to do it, I'm seeking out an authentic relationship with another brother or another 3 or 4 brothers or a couple of couples. Don't hear me just, oh, you're talking small. I'm talking about something that is revolutionary. And it goes back to my roots, like you, Tim. I was not converted in a church setting. I grew up in the building, but I'd never heard the gospel. I was converted by myself in my dorm room at the University of Tennessee in 1974. And immediately there were 3 or 4 other people who had come to Christ about the same time. And they came from similar backgrounds to mine. They'd grown up in the church, but they didn't know anything about church, didn't know Jesus at all. And I can remember one night we were sitting around, and it was early, we were brand new babes in Christ. And one of the guys says, Friday night's coming up. What do we do? And what he was getting at was, we knew what pagans do on Friday night, but we had no idea what a follower of Jesus do. So we began to meet together to read the Bible, to pray, and to play cards. And that soon became this gathering of college students just meeting together. Now, it turns out to do all kinds of wonderful New Testament stuff, but we wouldn't have dreamed of calling it a church. And those are my roots. And I feel like I'm kind of coming back to my roots of these deep, very accountable relationships in faith, growing together. That I think is what I'm seeing. And I find it refreshing. And to punctuate that, I'm seeing what looks like a rerun of the 1970s Jesus movement in America today. On college campuses, thousands and thousands of kids are coming to Christ. They're being mass baptized, which is freaking out the church hierarchy, because that can't be real. And I think they're searching for this thing that I'm talking about, this authenticity of relationship with another brother, and of course with Christ who is with us.
I do. I've often wondered, and I think you and I have had this conversation, if our structure was wrong. You know, I'm a systems and structural guy out of Georgia Tech, so I'm like going, I wonder if first of all, this kind of leads into a leadership conversation we'll have in a minute, but I've wondered if we put people, mostly men, in roles, and it's almost an impossible success opportunity. I met with a guy last week in Sarasota that has been attempting to help pastors get side gigs so that they're not poor all the time, so that they could eat. And he says it's one of the hardest things he's ever done, because they think, number one, that God will be mad at them if they do something, to chase after that, filthy lucre, whatever. And then number two, some of them have boards that they truthfully want to keep them poor. And so I do wonder if we've got a wrong structure. Gloria and I are very similar. We don't usually go to a lot of these structured, building situations. And I still love some of the music. To me, it's a little bit more entertainment in a lot of the ones we pop into. I would have loved to hang out. I think you were probably talking about Jonathan a second ago. I would love to be able to hang out with you and Jonathan. He visited us in Rapid City, by the way. I don't know if you heard that story.
Oh, awesome. He told me that. I didn't know where you were, but I knew
we sat on the back of, the RV there and visited and had church. Truthfully, we had church for, a couple of hours, just the 4 of us, his wife, Gloria, and him. But something that I've I heard this term recently, and it was called the church industrial complex. What I see, and this is maybe a little bit looking forward, predicting, and I don't like making predictions, but I'll just ask you about this. I actually see some large church, either organizations or what we'll call mega churches, that are beginning to form up, and a lot of the smaller are disappearing. And it's almost like what we see with the large corporations in our country, with, large military. I mean, we're starting to get some extremely large organizations, and then there's not anything kind of down below it. What do you think? What are you seeing with some of as things are moving forward? Does that make any sense, or is there some different things that you see?
Yeah, I think it's funny. You talk about being an engineer by training. I'm a historian and theologian by training, so it colors my thoughts. But I do think when you look at history, you see the constant bifurcation of every civilization, right? You see, we've talked about the haves and the have-nots. We talk about the empowered and the marginalized. I mean, this has been going on from the beginning, and we're seeing it today. This story plays out again and again, where it's a little bit of the dialectic of, the 1 point, second point synthesis, right? And so I think that's what we begin to see in sociological development, is that there's a bifurcation: companies, economies, church. The church is an industry. I don't like to think that way, but I do think that the evangelical industrial complex, it's very real. And so we're seeing the big churches, and we're seeing the little churches are kind of dying, but the dialectic says that a new life will come out of this tension. And I think that's what we're seeing today. And I hope that's not too philosophical for folks to think about, but I do think that's what's happening. And I think, we're seeing, no disrespect to pastors, but I think we're putting into a role, primarily men. They cannot succeed. Even the ones who are wildly successful, by what standard? The congregational size, how many sub-campuses they have. I don't know what metrics you use, but even those, they're falling apart on the inside. There's the horrible moral failures, but there's also just the bad insides of guys who go to bed at night weeping over, they know they're missing their art. It's terrible. I've told people for years, I said, guys, this is an unnatural role. The church has never been meant to be built on one person. And you can say, well, we have a plurality of elders. Look, all animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others, to quote George Orwell, right? I think we've created a non-sustainable dynamic, and we're beginning to see it run its course. And by the way, I'm not discouraged by that, Tim. I'm encouraged that what comes out of it will be new and fresh and vibrant and living once again.
Yeah, I met someone a few weeks ago, Wayne Previtt. I think I might be interviewing him next week. He's from Canada. He now lives in Virginia. He did some things with chaplaincy programs up in Canada, and he's done like 4,000 burials and things like that. But had an interesting conversation about, he was talking about what it's like living in a post-Christian country, which Canada is.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that what took 15 years in Canada took 5 years in the US, and we're heading that direction. Maybe it's slowing, maybe it's speeding up, I don't know. And I think that the place that people are going to get the connection to the Father, their spiritual nourishment, whatever, are more in environments like business is mission, and places like that. I think this is a good kind of transition into what all went on with business as mission over the last 5 years, and what are some things happening now, and maybe what are some things in the near future that are going on with that movement.
So I think to understand what's happened in the last 5 years in business as mission, you have to go back a little bit further to where the modern movement began. It began as a strategic attempt to reach people in unreached people group areas, restricted access countries where traditional missionaries couldn't go. Business people could go, not fake business people, not what we call business as visa, but real business people doing real business, but also on real mission, right? This integrated view of life and faith and so forth. And it grew. That was kind of the late 80s, early 90s. It grew and grew. And then the pandemic hit. What we discovered was a beautiful thing, because up until that point, I would call that that first part, multiple chapters, but the first section of the book would be called From the West to the Rest. Right? It was us lighter skinned guys, for the most part, taking business into the hinterlands to reach people for Christ. And it was good. It was a beautiful thing. What we discovered when we said, all right, we're going to go virtual for this Congress. Nobody knew how long the pandemic would last, of course. And so we're going to go online, and instead of having everybody flying to Chiang Mai, which has been maybe 300 or 400 or 500 people, we're going to go virtual. Well, what we discovered is suddenly it's like, wow, we're everywhere, and we're all different colors. This is not a light skin help the dark skin, America help the other country. This is like, it's literally everywhere. And these folks are as different. I know diversity is a hot word these days, but we were as diverse as you could possibly imagine. That people from pretty much every kindred, tongue, tribe, and nation, to quote the scripture, were already engaged. And they weren't doing it because we went there. They were doing it on their own because God called them into it. So we had this massive online celebration of the true international, multi-ethnic quality of the business as mission movement. This is beautiful. It was kind of like one of those things where God was just looking at us and just kind of wagging his finger with a smile, like, see, I did know what I was doing the whole time. And so that now has given, that was sort of the pandemic era of lots of virtual work, which then proved two things. One is we're truly diverse and international, which is beautiful. And the other is you don't have to get on a plane to fly to Chiang Mai, Thailand to get blessed. God is using the virtuality of technology in ways that I don't think any of us would have ever believed possible. That's changed the dynamic of how we teach, how we mobilize, how we equip, how we fund, how we coach, everything. We're still hopping on planes. I mean, you still need to be with people. I love seeing you on screen. This is fun. You and I are close enough. We can do this. But 10 times rather be sitting outside Theo, by the fire and just enjoying time with you in glory. I mean, I'd far rather do that. So, but we discovered that we can go further faster by, all these different means. So that's, I guess, the second piece. And the third thing, which to me is really exciting, is that it is time for the next generation to take over. This is not me retiring. This is not you won't have Mike Baer to kick around anymore. This is me recognizing as an older brother that the young guys are no longer just kids. They are young men, women that God has prepared, and it's their turn. And so I think that sort of transitions from what I'm seeing to what I'm looking at in the future, is that this is time for the next generation to step up, and they're doing it. And they're doing it in the most respectful way. Somebody said the other day, we're standing on your shoulders, which is the most honorific thing I think I've ever heard. They're not saying, you did it, man, you're the man. That's hollow. But when they say, we're standing on your shoulders, like, that's as it should be. And someday somebody should be standing on their shoulders, just like I'm standing on the shoulders of a guy named Richard Barr, who was instrumental in me coming to Christ. And so this is the great transition I see beginning, and I see it in the near future. It really excites me.
Yeah, it is interesting because I recall you have never been one to shy away from jumping on a plane and going somewhere.
Too much so, I think.
Mike, you Delta, there's probably a plaque somewhere that Delta has with your name on it, I believe.
I used to think there should be.
There should be. But somewhere along the way, I don't know if it was before then or right after then, you started doing a podcast that obviously is part of this, I'll say, digital communication, or this new media, or whatever words we may want to use. Yeah. Tell me about that and how that formed up. Was that a pandemic project?
It was. So I got the idea. We originally named it BAM Stories, but it became the Business as Mission podcast. And it's now, like it's on every platform out there. It's not, here's a commercial. We do not have near the listenership you have. So if you're doing something, I love your podcast, but it was a pandemic initiative, and it was another attempt to just keep leaning into what we felt like God was doing. And we built it around the idea of, rather than teaching and lecturing, we just tell people stories. I learned a lot from you in the early days, and it's helped a lot to say, let people tell their stories. Stories resonate. And so that's going on. We've launched a YouTube channel called Business's Mission with Mike Baer, and it's picking up a lot of followers, a lot of subscribers. And so there's multiple things like this. Third Path Initiative, as you know, is an online education platform, and it's meant to give people a virtual place to go study and learn. They don't have to go to a university. They don't have to go to a conference in London. They can at least begin to grow and hone their business's mission skills. But Tim, this plays into something that to me is really becoming important. And it's a leadership lesson. It's a life lesson. I feel like there's a transition that we as men, as people, I should say, because I'm sure it's true for women also, that we move from being the doers to we start becoming the advisors, right? But I think there's something beyond that where we start becoming the beers. And what I mean by that is there's a time when you're out there doing it. That was to me, paying Delta's bills, flying millions of miles with those guys, literally, to now advising, trying to share with the younger generation what I've learned, particularly where the landmines are. Don't step there. Then I kept thinking, what's beyond that? And a guy introduced me to this about 6 months ago. It's called being. Just being. And I don't think this is for kids. I don't think this is an early stage. I think it's a later stage where just the who you are. All right, you talk about leadership. I think the who you are begins to eclipse the what you say and what you do. And so that's, to me, where for me personally and some of the other senior guys in the BAM movement, that's what we're beginning to learn is let them run with it. They need us, but they don't need us to do, or they don't even need us to teach. They need us to be who Jesus has made us.
One thing that's interesting about that, I saw an article, it was Wall Street Journal, is one of these articles where I saw the headline, but I didn't read it. I'm sure people never do that. But it got me thinking about things. And the article headline went something like this. There was an investor who was tapping into 50 and 60-year-olds to lead startups and businesses and stuff like that.
That was just the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. And it got me thinking, I think it feeds into this. I think this is kind of how we'll move towards landing the plane here. But I was just thinking about, and especially in, talking with you and then last week, Jim, and you just brought it up, and I think this is a good, valuable thing to discuss here. How do we, as we'll call it mature leaders, business people, men of God, whatever term or title we want to add, I don't think any of us are hung up with titles really. How do we support the generations behind us? How do we raise them up? How do we allow them to stand on our shoulders? Yeah, I don't even know what the right terms are, but it seems as if that's kind of one of our callings here. I don't even know if I have a question around that other than a statement. So respond. What say you, Mike?
It's a hard thing to put into words. I think the hardest thing for the more mature leaders out there is learning not when to retire. I don't believe in retirement. I mean, I'm still working probably as much as I ever did. Love what I do, doing it for different reasons. But so don't think of retirement. I do think there's a place for handing off the baton, for letting the next generation take the baton and run the next leg of the relay. I don't think we do that very well. Even guys like me at almost 70, it'd be very easy for me to think about running things, leading things, being the CEO. I think that's the first lesson we need. If we've done a good job of modeling the way, if we've done a good job of inspiring a shared vision, if we've done a good job of communicating values and teaching them what leadership is and how to lead, and they've begun to see it and grasp it, getting out of the way and letting them do it becomes a big part of this process. The other is knowing, when do you stop even advising? When do I shut up and stop advising? Because that's just another form of bossing. It can be. When do I just know that, what, they need me around? They need my presence. They need to know I'm there, and they need to know they can come when they need encouragement, when they need to be listened to, when they need a safe place to kick around ideas. I think that's my next challenge. And I'm just beginning to enter this phase of, Lord, show me the difference between even being a good advisor and just being a good man, and letting them come and get what they need. Maybe that's the grandpa in me. I don't know. You're a grandfather. Maybe that's let them come and ask for what they need. But I do think this article that you're referring to in the Wall Street Journal is a great article. It reminds me a little bit of the silly movie called The Apprentice with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway in it. If you haven't seen it, I would encourage your listeners to watch it. It's silly, but it makes a really good point. And part of it is this old guy who'd been in the role comes back as a temporary employee, and no one knows who he is. But he's there, and he turns. It's a great story and a good ending. But it really is the idea that, we need the old guys around. Let's don't put them out to pasture. It's just not Soylent Green. We don't send Edward G. Robinson into the room to listen to music while he commits suicide. I mean, we need the old guys around, and we've never quite figured out what to do with them. And part of that is that they've never figured out what to do with themselves. So learning that, I think, is huge.
I'm going to circle back to something we brought up at the beginning, and I think this will be a good ending point for us. I think for me, maybe for the way you're wired too, I'll make the statement and then you can respond. I need to be okay with not getting credit. And I think one of the things I've wanted, you and I, we discussed it earlier, it might've been some different languages that, we need the impact. We need to, if Mike mentored Tim and Tim does something great, Tim's given the acceptance speech, and you need to say, I'm here because of Mike Baer, which there's some degree of truth to that. But if Mike needs that, and I will admit that I have needed that. I recognize when I'm dealing with my grown children and others that if I am thinking about how they're going to mention my name at some point, I'm not coming across with the right attitude. And maybe it's that servant heart. Maybe it's being a good steward. I don't know. There's probably some spiritual things here too, but I do think, and it doesn't mean we just go out to pasture. I think we're available. And I think somehow there's this balance between we need to make sure they know we're available and we're around.
Yeah.
But we're not crotchety about it. Like, well, it's about time you came and asked a question. See, what pops in your mind when I go on that little mini rant that I just went on?
No, it's a great one. And part of it comes back to, guys, let's don't live in a fantasy world where we're going to be suddenly delivered from all of these, substandard motivations. They're not going to go away. Stop looking for that. You'll beat yourself up forever. The thing that comes to mind as you're talking about that is if I'm sitting in a cave on the mountain and waiting for the pilgrims to come to me, I think that's a fool's errand, to quote Shakespeare, right? I need to be engaged. I need to be among the people. The word even the word retire is like, it's like leave the field, get out, go away. I'm not going away. And I'm not going to come in and try to run things, but I'm going to be there. If I was a CEO of a company that was being handed over to my son, for example, I would not stop coming in. I'm not going to suddenly go away and play the, if you want my wisdom, then you come to me. That's arrogance. But just remember the difference between advising is I'm waiting to be asked or I'm seeking to be asked, and being, it's just literally just that. But to be, I have to be present. Me being by myself in North Carolina, the wise sage, helps nobody. So I've got to engage. And I think that's the temptation. I'm using too many words to express this. It's a fairly new thought, as you can tell. But the idea that I got to stay connected. Otherwise I'll die.
But the cool thing about that is that we can stay connected. Business is Mission podcast, the Seek, Go, Create here. And I do recommend for people listening in here, Business's Mission podcast is a great place to go because, I know you listen to a lot of things here, Mike. Wouldn't you agree that the audience probably has some similar characteristics, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They're all in different stages of their quest of figuring out, if I'm called to business, which is always the first principle, then Lord, why? And that's what the stories are about. That's people, how they discovered their call and the different ways that can express itself. But I think they all have that in common.
Yeah. So check all those things out. We'll include links so you could jump over. In fact, right now, if you're on your podcast player, go over and listen to a few episodes and subscribe to Business's Mission podcast. Last question for you, Mike. Kind of forward thinking, what kind of message do you have for, this is where we share the wisdom of the, I was going to say old guy, mature guy with,
it's all the same.
We could talk about issues and challenges, but I know you're an optimistic guy. I know we're looking forward and excited about the future and things like that, but just what's a parting message you have for people that might be listening in? And most of them are probably in some form of a leadership role. So what do you want to share?
Wow. So it's 2 words. We win. If you're seeking in any way, form, or fashion to know and follow Christ, and I'm not going to prescribe what that looks like because it looks different for different folks, but if you're on that continuum, we win, which is an optimistic statement. It's a confident statement, but it's back to where we began. It's me taking open hands and saying, I'm not going to win the game. You're going to win the game, and I'm going to win with you.
Yeah, that's good. Man, Mike Baer, always good to talk to you. Let's see what we could do and get a, 3-4 hour episode in at some point. I think that would be
Let's
fun.
do it.
I don't know what it would look like.
Maybe I think every listener knows they could do it. It may not be good, but they can do it. But they can do it.
Wow. Yeah. I just listened to a 5-hour podcast with Dan Carlin on hardcore history, and he was talking about Alexander the Great for 5 hours.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, incredible. Great conversation. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for helping us celebrate this 300 episodes. For those that are listening in, make sure you jump down, make comments if you're on YouTube. Love to hear your thoughts on some of these things we've talked about. Agree, disagree, that's fine by us. If you're on your podcast player listening, make sure you subscribe and share, and all that helps. We appreciate it and are just thankful for 300 plus episodes now. Thank you all. So thanks for listening in, and we'll see everybody next week.